Hello, this is Woolly Bay. Welcome to my channel, and this is the first tutorial in the Learn to Crochet series. And today we're not going to do any hands-on work. We're just going to take a look at the weights and fibers. So if you're new to crochet, then you're kind of going to want to understand what is what. So the first thing I am going to show you, we're going to start with the heaviest weight I've got here. This is a chunky or bulky weight. Now yarn does come in heavier weights than this, but I don't usually use much heavier than this. I prefer very light weights. I'll give you an example of that in a moment. I tend with my blankets and stuff to use an Aran weight or a worsted weight, not a chunky weight, but these do make excellent blankets. You can also make hats and booties and scarves with a chunky weight yarn. They also turn out quite nice. So there are projects that are really, that the bulky or chunky weights are very good for. So this is an acrylic. Acrylic is really good for putting in the washing machine or the dryer. If you're a yarn snob, I will agree with you that pure fibers are nicer, but I do believe very strongly and even practice the line of thinking that when it comes to making things for children, when it comes to, say you want a blanket for camping, or you want a pair of booties to wear around the house, things that are going to get dirty and need to be thrown into the wash, you cannot go wrong with acrylic. So that's just my personal take on that. That acrylic does serve its purpose, even though there are much nicer fibers that weave up much nicer. There are things that for which acrylic is just more practical, and it's affordable. So if you're new to crochet and you're making your first projects, I would advise you to just practice and grow with acrylic. It's affordable, it's cheap. If you make something really that's maybe not the work you're going to do in a year or 2 years, you can look back on it, but you can also, again, you won't have invested too much. Now the next weight down, the more commonly used, and I'm trying to get these in here, but I'm just kind of failing. Let me see if I can pull this down just a bit. There we go. This is a worsted weight. In the UK, they call that Aran weight. So if you're in the US and you're shopping for yarns, you're going to be looking at a worsted weight when you look at this. This weight is also good, like I said, for hats and booties and scarves and blankets. It is also good weight yarn to use if you're learning. Okay, this is a wool. I wouldn't advise using a wool to learn on. I would advise you to stick with acrylic, but this is a wool, and it is wool is very nice. It's a very nice yarn to use, but it's also more expensive. Some washable wool can go in the washing machine. Some wools are not washable. Okay, they call them superwash. And you can put them in the washing machine on cold, but not all wools qualify as superwash. So wool's kind of tricky. You have to make sure you're getting a washable wool, and you cannot put it in the dryer. And when you lay it out to dry, you usually need to reshape it. So just keeping that in mind. You don't want to also give this to people who are going to need to wash it, like items for children. Yeah, you can make a nice wool little sweater for a child, but is that really practical? So I love natural fibers. So I'm in agreement, like I said, with the yarn snobs, that natural fibers are, of course, a little better, but you got to be practical. So if you're starting out, maybe try wool in 6 months or a year, whenever you feel like you've grown enough for that. Okay, but I would just stick with an affordable yarn in the meantime. This is also a worsted weight, and it is a polyester. It's not really expensive, and so it's a little more affordable than buying wood. Actually, a lot more affordable. It's super soft, it's luxurious, and your needles will just slide right through this. And I made a blanket for my grandson out of the polyester yarn, and the parents just went on and on about how soft it was, because what they remember was their grandparents sewing up things that were scratchy. So you can put this in the washing machine. You cannot put it in the dryer. It has to be air dried. Okay, so if you buy a polyester yarn, you'll need to air dry it, but it can be washed, so it's practical as well, and it's priced right for people who are new. Okay, now this is an acrylic wool mix. So I'm kind of getting the best of both worlds with this. I can put it in the washing machine. I can put it in the dryer. I probably will let it air dry simply because it has wool content. But it's what you call a light worsted. In the UK, that's called a DK weight, okay? But in the US, it's light worsted. It's slightly lighter if I compare it to the regular worsted. Okay, and I don't know how well this is going to show up on here, but you can see it's just a bit lighter than the worsted weight. I make a lot of blankets out. Now, I've got 2 blankets here from light worsted. I do like the light worsted. It's probably one of my favorites to use when I'm using the heavier yarns. So this is made, once you weave it up, it gets a little thicker. So this is made out of an acrylic DK or light worsted weight. Okay, and this is what you call mosaic overlay. All right, and then this is made out of a acrylic DK weight, and this is what you call tapestry. Okay, and both of these are designs that I've made and worked on. So these are light worsted DK weights, and like I said, it weaves up just a little heavier than it looks. And it's a really nice weight for things like that. It also makes great hats if you want a lighter weight hat. Great scarves if you want something a little more delicate but warm. So you can do a lot with a DK weight, and it's just slightly lighter. But I would go ahead and practice with your, right here, your Aran or worsted weight, okay? That's just my preference on that for learning. Okay, and then we're gonna move down now to what you call a fingering weight. This is a fingering weight. Oh, by the way, here's a DK in cotton. I'm just going to mention this. Cotton is very, very absorbent. And I like to mention this too because a lot of people think, oh, cotton make clothing. You can make clothing out of cotton. It's totally a great idea with certain items, but do remember that it's heavy, okay? It will lose its shape, and it also will lose its vibrancy over time, and it absorbs water, so it doesn't shed water real well. That can be really good for some clothing, but you need to take into that account. Also, when you stitch up acrylic or wool, those fibers bind together, but with cotton they do not. You're going to get very defined edges. It's never really going to fully bind. So your stitches, while they may be nice, they're not going to form like this. These fibers have kind of melted together a bit as I work them. But you're not going to get fibers that work so well together on this side. I love cotton and it has its uses, but you need to be aware of the stitch definition on this is better, but you'll have to just work with it and see what I'm talking about. But those stitches do not bind together quite as well. So that's a DK too, but actually to me, it looks more like a fingering weight. This is paint box DK. Now here's a wool DK, and you can see what I'm talking about here, where this is not, this is a fingering weight, a wool fingering weight, and this is paint box DK. So you can see how close those are together. So a lot of times what you're looking at is the company and how it's going to weave up. Once this weaves up, it's going to be a lot finer. If I can just pull that out like that, it's going to be a lot finer. Whereas this cotton is really never going to give much, okay? Cotton is quite rigid. So you'll want to actually look at the yarn to kind of determine, you know, if it's a DK, is it leaning more toward fingering? Is it, you know, how does that yarn actually look? Because I have some DK weight over there, and I'll show you how that weaves up, and it is very much more like fingering as well, okay? So right here, so this is very much like fingering as well, but it is a DK weight, and if you look at those, you can kind of tell that it's DK if I spread them apart there, okay? So some DKs are just slightly lighter than others. This is fingering weight, and when it weaves up, if I pull it apart, you can see it will, because these yarns are kind of puffing out a bit. It's complete 100% wool, and so that's why. Now, this is also fingering weight yarn as well, but it's leaning a bit on the lighter side. Some have actually described this as a lace weight. Lace weight is very, very fine. I think it probably does qualify as fingering though. This is Scapes. It's a cotton acrylic blend, and I'll show you something I've made with that just so you can kind of get an idea. And you can also get how that cotton works. Now, it's got acrylic in it, so spine's a little more, but that gives you an idea what I was talking about, the cotton and the definition. See, those stitches are so defined. They don't really kind of merge into the others quite as well, but it does have a beautiful result on some things. All right, so you can make some beautiful shawls and stuff with cottons and cotton blends. You can with the wools too. The wools just have a little different look. So that's a fingering weight, this is, and it's also Scapes. So anyway, that's just a little bit about fibers. And I would just suggest using an Aran weight or a worsted weight when you start to learn, and then just gradually move down as you get more control. Now, let's talk about hooks. You've got, this is what you call anodized aluminum, and these are the really cheap ones, okay? And if you live in the UK, you can get these real cheap at any craft store in the UK, but if you're in the US, you can also get them. I think even in Tesco at the UK, I bought, now I'm in the US right now, but I think when I was in the UK, even at Tesco, I bought packs of these really cheap, okay? So no matter where you are, you can probably get these anodized aluminum hooks really cheap. I know at our Walmart in the US, they're just a little over $1 a piece for these anodized aluminum ones. I bought this one in the UK. These are a little more expensive. They're my favorite hooks. And I've got a whole bunch of these as well, so quite a few of them. I've even got one in a Tunisian style hook. Now, Tunisian is a little different than traditional crochet, and we will be covering that down the road, but not anytime right away. It'll be, you know, a few videos on down, so we won't cover that quite yet. And so these anodized aluminum hooks are very cheap. They're very nice. However, if you're going to be doing something like the fingering weight, you're probably going to want a little nicer. This is a Clover hook. These, or you can get these for, you know, $1 or $2, or, you know, a couple pounds or whatever, depending on where you are. These Clover hooks are super nice. It works great with the lace weight. You're going to find that steel hooks or metal hooks sometimes will catch on the smaller yarn weights, but these Clover hooks just do such a great job. I'm not trying to give Clover a plug. I understand Boy is real good, and I'm sure that some of the people that might see this video can name off some others that are exceptionally good. So obviously I'm just telling you what I found works exceptionally well with the lighter weights, because some of those cheap metal hooks are a nightmare to work with when it comes to the lighter weight yarns. When it comes to the larger weights, these are great, but when you get down into those fingering weights, you're going to want a nice hook. And these are not cheap, but they're totally worth it. So that'll be something you might want to invest in down the line. Look at some other things that you might want just very quickly. You're probably going to want measuring tape if you're actually making anything. You don't have to have that while you're learning, but down the line, if you're making a blanket or if you're making a garment, you're going to want a measuring tape. Okay. And you're going to want a marker if you read patterns, because if you print them off, you're going to want to mark the ones you finished so that you don't lose your spot. That's going to be really good whether you're working row by row, round by round, or whether you just want to mark your place on them. So you probably want to stock up on things like that. You're going to need a good pair of clippers when you're starting out. Just use a cheap pair out of your kitchen or bathroom or wherever. But eventually, you're going to want to add a little stash to your little box. So I have a little plastic box down here, real cheap, but I keep all those little loose ends. I have some wooden boxes I do the same thing in. So you can organize them how you want, but you're going to want these things in your stash. And then you're going to, if you ever work a project that has designs on it like this, you're going to want to start out with markers, and you're also going to need those if you do clothing or anything of that nature. So for those, these are markers, and these just go onto, let me pull this down here and just give you a clue, okay? These just attach, so you're going to need to do something, make a change on line 15. Okay, so say right here, when you were working this right here, you hadn't gotten there yet, but you want to go in there and be sure you know that this is the place where you have to put that stitch. Okay. Also, they're very good for keeping up with stitch counts. So you might say, okay, I want to mark these every 25 stitches. And every 25 stitches, you can put a marker. If these slide out, and sometimes they do, just depends on what you're doing, you can also use these locking markers, okay? Here's one here, and they just lock, like a safety pin does, okay? And then, of course, if you are working on something and you need to, I wouldn't advise this normally, but you can also use something like a paper clip. It's just I would hate for you to snag any kind of delicate yarn that you have that you're working with. You ruin the look of it. All right, and then these are what you call darning needles or yarn needles. And in order to thread those, I have a threader somewhere. You can buy threaders, and what you do with those is you just put the threader through here. I seem to have misplaced mine, but you put the threader through this little hole here, and it just pulls the yarn right through it. And there are different types, and I'm trying to figure out where. There's my threader. Okay, let's use an example here. Okay, so you just put your threader through like that. Now it depends on where you are. Threaders are very cheap regardless. Let's take that's a little bitty hole there, see, and we're going to do that with a heavier yarn, a worsted weight yarn. Okay, so if I put that in that little hook, and you can see, and pull that through like that. That was a little harder, but you can see it will go through. You can also use this little end here, and sometimes threaders only come like this, and sometimes they only come like this. So it will just depend on what you have available to you. So if I take this kind of, here we go, and use this side of it, it probably is going to go through a little easier. Maybe not. There we go. Now that's with a heavier weight yarn. Thinner weight yarns are easier, but you can see, and they have all kinds of little needles like that at your craft store. You can order them online, but those are going to be really good for weaving in loose tails, so you can conceal them, and for some detail work that you might need on occasion. I'm sure there are other things that I should have told you, but I think that covers most of just the basic things you need to know in this moment. And if something crops up in one of the videos, of course, you'll be aware of it then. So if you are learning to crochet, start with a worsted weight or a chunky weight. You can move down to the lighter weights as you go. Invest in cheap hooks to begin with, and you can add the more expensive things to your box on down the line. And of course, when you start to make patterns, you might just start to add a little bit of this and that to your stash as you go. So that should cover all of that for the moment. And I hope you found this informative and helpful. And don't forget to like and subscribe, and look out for the next tutorial coming up on how to crochet.